This is a Kemp Oral History Project interview for the Jack Kemp Foundation with Flavie Charlie Flowers, a former AFL football player. We're in his home in Sandy Springs, Georgia, and today is Tuesday, August 16th, 2011, and I'm Brian Williams. Charlie, we've been asking people to start these interviews, just what first comes to mind when you think of Jack Kemp?
Well, when I think of Jack, I actually think of one of the best friends I've ever had. And I think of his exuberance and his just joy of being who he was and where he was and what he was doing. He was a lot of fun to be with, and we had some serious moments too. We would go at it pretty hard sometime in debate. I would do it just, I agreed with practically everything he said, but I didn't want him to know it. So we had some great times together.
Do any of those great times pop into your mind easily and you could relate some?
Well, we met, as you know, with the first year of the AFL. We were the Los Angeles Chargers. We knew we were, but not too many people in Los Angeles knew we were. But anyway, so Jack and I met the first day of practice, and for some reason, we hit it off as friends, and his roommate and my roommate at the time got cut pretty early, and we roomed together. And so some of the early conversations I had with Jack were pretty amazing, because Jack had, to my knowledge, really basically three great passions. One was football, one was politics, sort of politics, and the other was, believe it or not, economy. So he would spend a lot of time after practice and when in the quiet of the night, we'd be discussing things that I didn't think we were going to be talking about as a pro football summer camp. So he was a delight even then. So those are the things that struck me about Jack being Jack. As I recall, he might have been that year or maybe a year or two later that he worked for Ronald Reagan's group, and he really thought the world of Ronald Reagan and what he stood for. And I think that had a pretty basic setup for Jack's thinking down through the years, were those early years with him, or with his group. So needless to say, we had some pretty interesting conversations in that first training camp that year together.
Did you have to explain to the other players what Jack Kemp was all about because of this aberrant behavior, or not?
Not really, because it's hard to remember that it was 49 years ago, but from the very beginning, it was obvious that Jack was going to be the quarterback. I mean, he was clearly the best and had a cannon for an arm, as most of the ends and receivers could tell you. He had that, and for some reason he became our leader. Not that he sought it. I mean, it just was his style to be a leader, and so you really didn't have to explain Jack's behavior or his interests, because everybody looked up to him and thought so much of him. I mean, Jack was that kind of guy even from the beginning. He was a well thought of, aside from his talent, leader.
What form did that take, his style, sort of? What accounted for people immediately saying?
Well, first you have to be good. You can't be a leader if you don't have the talent. I mean, I don't know of one. So he had that, and he had that exuberance, and also Jack was bright. I mean, we all know that, obviously, but it was evident then that Jack knew what he was doing, and people just gravitated to him and looked up to him. And as I say, I don't think he sought that. It just was his by divine right, I suppose. So the guys, you didn't have to explain Jack to anybody. He was pretty self-evident, I guess you would say.
Did you room with him the whole 2 years you were together?
Yes, we roomed together, training camp and on the road, and for the whole time we were there. And then the third training camp before we both got traded.
Talk a little bit about the Los Angeles Chargers, a team that is created out of nothing. What was it like?
Right. Well, everybody was a rookie. That was strange because we had old veterans. I think Jack had been playing for 2 years, and we had guys that had been in and out of the league, and so it was a mishmash of young guys like myself and older guys, and so we all had to just blend together. And I think probably Sid Gilman, one of his great talents was making sure that we all worked as a team, and no individuals, and he was bigger than the team. Let's put it that way. So they really, it was just like a group of guys came together and formed a team from all over the country, Wisconsin veterans, guys from the Big Ten, the Pac-10, some from the SEC. They were all over the place.
Yes, you were part of the team of the decade at Ole Miss.
All right, yeah, the SEC team of the decade.
Right.
Well, that's true, but for a fullback or halfback or quarterback to be a part of the team of the decade, pretty good idea to have a real good team around you, or you're not going to be the team of anything. So we had a great football team. We really were. As a matter of fact, the Ole Miss team was in 1959 was the SEC team of the decade. So it was possible because of that.
Right. And did several of you go into professional football?
Oh yeah, practically the whole starting team, either all the seniors and the juniors the next year, all of them practically went in.
Now tell me about your being courted by various teams and signing 2 contracts and that whole complicated picture.
Well, when I made one of the All-American teams, we went up to New York, and the Giants had drafted me the previous year because I was a 5th-year senior. And so we visited, and they wanted to talk about contract, which was fine to me because we had a bowl game to play, but I was through after that. So they said, if you would sign a salary agreement, it wouldn't be a contract, but it would be an agreement that we would pay you this amount and you would earn this amount. And I actually called back, and the coaches said, sure, you can sign a salary agreement. Just don't sign a contract. So I said, fine. So I signed what I thought was a salary agreement. And I got back, and the next thing I knew, somebody had said that my contract had been turned into Burt Bell in the league office. And I said, no, it hadn't either. But anyway, we went to court, and they admitted, finally, that they called it a slight deception, as I recall. And it was. So we won in court against the Giants. And so I never did really worry about it because I knew the facts. And I was third-year law student, so I had enough sense to know that if the facts were what I knew them to be, that was going to be the end of it.
And that court case occurred before you joined Los Angeles?
Oh, yeah. It was in May of, before we went to camp in July.
Now, review your thinking about why you were drawn to the AFL rather than the NFL.
Well, there were several reasons. One is simply enough, being from the South, I didn't really like New York that much. It was not something that I was familiar with. And like most people, we were all enamored with California. I mean, having never seen anything resembling California, I just had an idea what it was. So it wasn't that. So it was that I liked that more. And the Giants, by then, see, I hadn't signed with San Diego, but by then I was so mad at the Giants for what they were doing. And I realized that it was just the 2 leagues going at it, that I was just caught in the middle, that it made it impossible for me to play for the Giants. So I just had a bad taste about the whole episode.
Did other NFL teams court you?
No, they couldn't. I would have been drafted by the Giants after my junior year in football, actually my fourth year in college.
Now, what kind of transactions did you have with Los Angeles Chargers before signing on? How did that work?
As I recall, they came down in January, and no, they came down at the end of December. We were in training camp. I mean, going getting ready for Sugar Bowl, and they talked to me. As a matter of fact, I think it was Frank Leahy, who was the old coach of Notre Dame. Now, this was a long time ago, but he came down and talked in general about what my contract would be, and so then after the Sugar Bowl, I forgot who represented the Chargers, but they came down, and the things that they said they would do were they. So I signed in New Orleans after the game that night. So, and then that's when the brouhaha started.
So, do you have any recollection of well, now let me ask you this. Did you have contact with Sid Gilman before the first day of practice?
No, I did not know him.
And when you were going through these negotiations, both with the Giants and then with the Chargers, did you have an agent?
No.
This was before the age of agents?
As far as I know, I don't know of anyone who ever had an agent. I mean, prior to our signing.
So all of you guys were doing this on your own?
Pretty much, unless you had a friend who might have been a lawyer from your hometown or something that might could help. But no, I don't know. There may have been some, but I really don't know. For one thing, the salaries weren't enough to keep an agent in groceries.
That's right. But now you had a leg up because you had the legal, I mean, you were almost through with law school, so you represented yourself probably pretty well.
Well, I don't know. I don't recall taking anything in law school that got me prepared for dealing with these people, but I think that probably, to some degree, it might have helped.
Right. So, what was that first year like then, as a season?
Well, it was just football, and everybody was bigger, and of course, I came from a pretty tough league in the SEC, so it wasn't that big of a leap that I thought it was going to be. Like I say, everybody was bigger and maybe a little faster. The game was a little faster, and it was a totally different form of football that we played at Ole Miss. Because at Ole Miss we rolled out, and the quarterbacks were all sprinters, and they had to get outside and they were part of the running game. And Jack tried to be, and he would get killed. And we would say, "Jack, can't you go out of bounds?" And he'd say, "I meant to, but I forgot." And he would just come back all upside down. So it was the pro football, the difference being it's a passing league, obviously, and I did not come from a passing league. So in that respect, you had to learn different forms of football, like pass protection and that sort of thing that was not alien to me, but we didn't emphasize it at Ole Miss.
Well, Kemp was famous for scampering around in the backfield and holding the ball for a long time. That must have put a lot of pressure on the offensive line.
Yes, and he wore these junior high pads, and he wore the least amount of pads he could wear. But when he had the football and when he was scrambling, somehow I got the impression that he thought he was Ollie Matson or somebody, because he would go tearing down the field and just get wiped out and not go out of bounds. Sid would get onto him, and the players would get, and he said, "Oh, I meant to, but I couldn't do it," you know.
And did he suffer concussions in those first couple of years, do you imagine, or not?
Back in those days, we had concussions and nobody knew about it. We had concussions and came back in the second half of the game. Might not have remembered a lot of it, but you played. So I don't know. I don't recall concussions. That's a modern phenomenon, rightfully so. I'm not dismissing it, but we didn't get any special time off for a concussion.
Describe Sid Gilman as a coach. What was he like?
He was brilliant. He was a great offensive mind. He was tough, and he would be your friend after you were no longer playing for him, and he would be your friend in the off season. But during the football season, you were just something, a cog in his machine, and that's all you were, as far as I could tell. Maybe with the exception of Jack, of the quarterbacks. They were different, you know, because they met all the time together, and they ran the offense, and so they had a different relationship. As far as we were concerned, you just did your job, and then he would be your friend later.
Was he really tough on you?
Yes. He was not so much tough as he was demanding. And I don't know that he was ever truly satisfied with what he had. Very few people know this, but Lance Allworth ended up playing in Dallas, I think. Paul Lowe got traded. Keith Lincoln, who was a great football player, ended up somewhere else. John Haley, I think, ended up in either Green Bay or Houston. All these guys, Sid always kept looking for somebody he thought was better. And sometimes they were, and sometimes they weren't. You know, it was not for me to say.
And what was Baron Hilton like as an owner?
He was a fine gentleman. He stayed hands off, more or less, as far as I knew. But he was a really nice person, and was a real plus for the organization, I thought.
Did he interact with players much?
A little bit, not a lot. I guess he was busy with whatever he was doing with the Hilton Corporation, but some, and always pleasant and always upbeat, and was a really great owner.
And he let Gilman do his hiring and firing.
Yes, I can't imagine anybody letting Sid do anything but that, because he ran everything about the franchise that was run.
Is that typical of coaches generally, or is that unusual?
I wouldn't think so, because Sid was the coach and general manager, and that is unique. Certainly today, there is no other team that has that I know of. So he was the Chargers. I mean, what he said happened, and what he said no didn't happen. So it was just that simple.
Chuck Noll and Al Davis were also around.
Yeah. It was obvious that they were bright. It was obvious that they were going to go somewhere. I think it was Al's first major coaching job, as I recall, and Chuck, I think he had just not been out of pro football very long. But yeah, they were bright young brains, and it was obvious.
You said a moment ago that when Kemp arrived, it was clear that he was going to be the quarterback. There were two other quarterbacks on the team, I think, Bob
Clatterbuck
and Bob
Larabaugh. And then I think they made a linebacker out of Bob Larabaugh. Mm-hmm. And the next year, Hunter Ennis came and played. But Jack, I'm not to say that these guys weren't good football players, they were. But Jack was clearly, from the very first day, it was obvious that Jack was going to be the quarterback.
Talk a little bit about race in the very early days of the AFL. And did Gilman have a particular point of view on that issue?
Well, because I was from Mississippi, so I took a lot of kidding, and I kidded back. And we were good friends, Paul Lowe and Ernie Ladd and Earl Faison, Ernie Wright. We were all good friends, and we sort of blended as a team. Now, when we went to Houston, as I recall, we might have stayed at the University of Houston campus. And I remember we went to a movie, and we had some of the black guys on the team either didn't go or couldn't get in, and we walked out as a team. And that was the only thing I remember overtly of a racial nature. The guys on the team, we would kid each other. They would kid me about being from Mississippi, and I'd say, yeah, I'm going to get you behind the cotton curtain, you know, and we would joke about it. But we got along really well, because there wasn't a place for that. I mean, we dressed together, we ate together, we slept together, we hit each other on the field, and we were a team.
Was Ole Miss integrated when you were there?
No.
So did you have a learning curve at all?
Well, no, because my hometown was probably 2/3 black, so it wasn't as though I was a stranger to black guys. I'd grown up with them, you know. So, but we were integrated, but I would play touch football back when I was a kid, and so I don't think the SEC integrated to the. I remember that we like to joke that when Sam Cunningham from Southern Cal came down and played Bear Bryant of the Alabama Crimson Tide and just beat him to death. And I said that did more for integration in the South than anybody else, because Bear Bryant said, we can't win without African Americans on our football team. So he immediately got good football players that way. So that kind of broke the ice. I don't know what year it was, but it was the year after Sam Cunningham beat him so bad in Birmingham.
Did Jack have a particular role in terms of race, or during the years you were with him?
Jack, to my knowledge, it's hard to say. He didn't even acknowledge that there was a race. In other words, to him, people were people. He just didn't. And I know that years later, as he got into politics, he genuinely was on the side of whatever form of integration was necessary for him to tout. He was definitely a believer.
Now, the '61 season was a real step up for you. You went 12-2.
Yeah, we went 10-4 the first year and got beat by Houston. And the second year we went 12-2 and got beat by Houston again, as a matter of fact. But yeah, going to San Diego was just a wonderful, wonderful experience because people cared. I remember one year, the first year, we played the New York Titans, and I think it was to cinch the AFL West Division. And in the Coliseum, there were less than 10,000 people there. You could hear individual people yell. And I looked at 100-something thousand empty seats, or 90,000 empty seats. So when we went to San Diego, it was amazing the difference. They really cared. They came out for us. The exhibition games even, they had a big crowd. So it was like night and day.
And that was Balboa Stadium. Balboa Park.
And they had to, as I recall, they had to do a lot of work prior to our coming down there.
Now, the '62 season was pretty awful.
Well, yeah. I always said it's because they traded Jack and me, but I don't know.
Well, that's my next question. How did you account for that?
Well, Jack, as I recall, I had gotten traded a little bit earlier, but Jack, I think, broke a finger or something, and they had to go with John Hadle, who was a rookie. And by then, the league had gotten kind of tough. It was the third year. And so, as I recall, they went like
4-10-3.
Yeah, something like that.
Or 4-10.
Right. And I don't, by then, I was either playing for New York or hurt. So I lost contact with exactly how that happened. Because when I left them, they had enough talent to beat anybody. But obviously, they missed Jack. And that had to be one of the key reasons. I don't know if he was responsible for 4-10, but believe me, had he played, they'd have been better. And it made Buffalo immediately better when he got there.
Did others of you go in '62? Or
I don't know. The attrition with the Chargers was so great. He would he would churn players. I mean, you never knew. He would bring them in, get rid of them. He'd say hello and meet somebody, and their locker would be gone 2 or 3 days later. It was pretty wild.
Do you think Sid Gilman was really surprised when Buffalo was able to pick up Kemp on waivers?
From this came from Jack. Most people think Jack got traded, but as I recall, he was put on waivers and Buffalo picked him up, even with his injury. But I can't imagine Sid Gilman being outsmarted on a waiver wire. That's not like Sid. That's not like that to happen to him. So I wasn't there and I don't know, but my guess would be he felt that maybe for public relations or something, that would be the way to get rid of him. I don't know. I don't know why he did it, because Sid was all he had to do was pick him up in 24 hours, and he could have done that had he wanted to. So no, I think he knew what he was doing. That's just me. I have no way to know that.
And you and Jack never discussed that?
Well, not down to the nuts and bolts, but just that how surprised he was that he was put on the waiver wire with as I recall, a broken finger. And it sure got well quick with Buffalo.
So you would, when did you leave for the Titans?
As a matter of fact, it was strange. I left the Chargers, went out to a motel. The Titans came in, and we played the Chargers the next week in the last exhibition game. And we went to Oakland and played Oakland, and came back and played San Diego in the second game of the series. So I played 3 games still out on the West Coast with another team. That was strange.
But you went over to the Titans at what point?
Yeah, they got it was the last exhibition game of the season, because they flew in and I joined them, and we played San Diego that week.
But you went to practice and played for the Chargers for the first
3 games.
First 3 exhibition
right, exhibition games, yeah. And got traded to. I think then he'd realized Paul Lowe and Keith Lincoln might be a little bit better than I was, so that might have had something to do with it. Keith was a great football player.
And then Jack, I guess, didn't leave until the season had started.
Right.
So you were. I've heard this rumor, this story, that Jack, after he was traded, or after he not traded, after Buffalo picked him up. Buffalo picked him up. He came back to the practice field in San Diego to say goodbye to the teammates, and Sid Gilman would not recognize him. Just looked the other way. Have you heard that?
No, but it's certainly believable. Sid was tough. He was single-minded. Let's put it that way. Single-minded. People to him, football players to him, were a commodity. Now, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde once a season. He was a wonderful, wonderful guy after the season. But during the season, not so wonderful. I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but he was tough.
So talk a little bit more about the nature of your relationship with Jack Kemp. First maybe with football and then later.
Well, it lasted 49 years. So I'll make it as brief as our football association, we just sort of became great friends. And then when he played for Buffalo, he would come back. I was living in Jackson, Mississippi at the time, and he came back through Jackson with Joanne, his wife, and the kids. We had a babysitter, and we went to the Sugar Bowl together and had a great time. And then I was scouting at that time for the Chargers, and a couple of times I went to Buffalo to scout, and we'd get together there. And then we went, as a matter of fact, we went to the first Super Bowl together in Los Angeles. He had gotten beat by Kansas City, I guess, in the championship game, and so they came out to the Coliseum, and we joined them. Then we went, Joanne and Jack and Sharon and me went to the game together. That was '67. So then Jack retired from football, I think '68 or '9, and immediately got into politics. And it was always my belief that when you say Jack got into politics, he got into politics because that's what it's called. But Jack, to me, was not a politician. Jack had a set of core beliefs, and to my knowledge, it never changed. Jack did not, in the sense that politicians may sometimes put their finger in the air and see which way the wind's blowing. I don't recall Jack ever having done that the whole time he was in politics. So he began a group of his friends and from all over the country that we would go to Super Bowls together, and Jack would put it all together and get tickets from the league, and also I digress, but he was also the president of the AFL Players Association, so that was sort of a beginning of his political career. But Jack had three loves, as I said: football, economics in the sense that it was conservative economics, and politics to the degree that that's what it took to get his points across. So we would go to the Super Bowls together and just have a great time. And one of Jack's big heroes was Abraham Lincoln. And me being from the South, I respected him, but he wasn't one of my great heroes. And we would go at it and I would read up on Abraham Lincoln so I could pull his chain a little bit. And he would always defend him. And really, we spent a lot of time teasing each other about Abraham Lincoln. And we would get together at these bowl games and just rehash and kind of renew our friendship. So then in the early, Jack was a skier. I'm kind of moving around here, but Jack was a skier, always had been a great skier. I'd never seen a pair of skis, but I love the mountains and we love the snow. So we went out to Vail one early in 1980, and Jack had a friend across the street from where we were staying, and we just fell in love with it. And so he bought a place, and I bought a place in Vail in the early '80s. And so then from that time on, we saw each other in the winter and in the summer out there, and we skied together, if you want to call it that. Skiing with Jack is the equivalent of seeing the back of his head. That's all you saw when you skied with him. Joanne would ski with us. Jack was gone, but he would wait for us at the bottom of the lift line so we could ride up together. And so we skied together for years and years, and I got a little bit better. And thank goodness. And we really cemented our friendship, if that's the term, over those years, because we saw each other. And then Judith, his daughter, moved to Atlanta with her family, and we visited. He would come down and visit Judy, and we would get together and renew. So it was an ongoing friendship for 49 years. That's a long time. But he was a dear, dear friend of mine.
Did he consult with you at all when he was the president of the Players Association?
Yes, he didn't so much ask my opinion as he would run things by me. And I think it was his way of wanting my comment without having to say, what do you think about this? Because he obviously had his own mind made up. He just wanted, I guess, to reinforce. So he would call and he'd say, what do you think? Well, I was not nearly am not now, nearly as pro-union as you need to be president of it. So we disagreed quite a bit about that, good-naturedly, you know. So, but yeah, he would call, and not often, maybe 3 or 4 times.
In your judgment, was that an important part of his life?
Yes, I think so. He took it seriously, let's put it that way, and it was an important part of the league's life. So therefore, whether you wished it to be or not to be, it turned out to be important for everybody's sake, because they were combining the two leagues, and that was a pretty difficult thing to do. And he was right in the middle of that. So, but he didn't ask my advice about any of that. That was over my pay scale.
Any other vivid memories of your times with Jack Kemp as a friend?
Oh yes, gosh, we would. The most vivid, obviously, were the years and years we spent in Vail together. Being Jack, everybody who was somebody in Vail, Colorado, loved him and befriended him, and because of that, I got to know so many people. And he would have parties at his condo, or if he was invited to someone's party, like Dr. Stedman or somebody, he would make sure that we got to go. So we spent a lot of social times, and I would say this: of all the food I've ever eaten in my life, Mexican food was something I had never considered a meal. Jack loved it. Joanne loved it. And so we must have eaten 100 Mexican dinners with Jack and Joanne and in Vail. They loved it. Matter of fact, going to dinner with them was going to Mexican dinner. They loved it. So yeah, we had a lot of memories in Vail, social as well as skiing. We did just about everything together.
What was Jack like as a social being?
He was effervescent. He was always up. He truly liked people, and people could tell that. And the people flocked to him. I mean, he had to be the most popular guy in Vail, Colorado. I mean, I think he ended up making the 4th of July speeches or something for their in the big stadium that they had there, and. He was a very social type person, and to my knowledge, the leaders in Vail, if they had a party and he wasn't there, it very much surprised me. Excuse me.
Some public figures are on stage, and then when they're off stage, they're quite different. Was that true of Jack or not?
No. Jack was not multifaceted. What you saw was what you got. When people tell what kind of politician was Jack, I don't think of Jack in terms of being a politician. Politics was what he had to enter to do what he wanted to do. He had a core set of beliefs. And to my knowledge, they never changed. They may have evolved one way or the other, but they never changed because we discussed them hours on end. And he, like I said, his really joy was conservative economics and this country. Those were the two things that, and I think he realized that to do that, you had to get into politics. So that was my belief, my understanding of his. But Jack was not multifaceted. What you saw was what Jack was.
I've heard the word impatient a lot in regard to Jack Kemp. Is that appropriate or not?
I would say that maybe of the top 10 impatient people in the United States, he would have to be numbered amongst them. He absolutely had no patience. He skied that way. He thought that way. His mind was so active, and it was a standing joke. He couldn't stand in line. Let's go. You know, he was he suffered waiting poorly. Let's put it that way.
Well, did that ever become a distraction, sort of, or make it hard to feel intimate with the guy?
Well, it may have distracted Joanne, but I thought it was funny. I mean, we got a kick out of it. Everything Jack did on a human nature always broke me up because he was so not naive. That's not the term to use, but he was so open that you could, you know, in his social thoughts and in his friendships, you could tell what he was thinking, you know. And so to me, that was just a facet of him that I thought was amusing, you know.
Would transparent be a good word to use?
Yes, because he had no guile. I mean, he did not hide in a shadow. As I said a couple of times earlier, what you saw was what you got. That was Jack, and he I think that way even in Congress. That I think they had to get used to somebody speaking from the heart and the head, and he did. To my knowledge, I don't recall him varying from his core beliefs.
Did you do much riding around with him in an automobile?
No, only if I was driving. No.
Tell me about that.
Well, Jack drove like we were talking. His impatience. He thought that he might have been the only car on the road, and I would say, Jack, you're too valuable, and I love myself too much for you to kill both of us. And he would just break up laughing. What do you mean? You know. So no, he part of his persona was the way he drove, right? And it was just about everything that Jack did, you could find some way to find amusing and mildly hilarious about it, because he was so open. I mean, no guile whatsoever.
But also dangerous, being a passenger. No?
Well, the thing to do is not to be a passenger any more than you had to be. Luckily, out west there was plenty of room, and the 4-lane highways on I-40, 70.
He retired from the Bills and ran for Congress in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Were you at all involved in that campaign? Or?
I know I knew he was doing it, and but not at all. No, that was over. I didn't get involved.
And did he consult with you at all about entering politics or not?
We talked about it. I wouldn't say he consulted, because you know he was his own man. He was going to do what he wanted to do. So I don't recall there being much doubt or much indecision about him doing it. I think he planned to do it. I don't recall him saying, you know, I'm wishy-washy. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't recall that. The whole time, I think he knew what he was going to do.
And you followed his career pretty closely?
Oh yes, absolutely. Critiqued it sometimes with him, just for meanness, because I knew him so well. You know, I knew what would jerk his chain a little bit, and I would do it.
You make reference to this in several places as being a kind of joking or thing, but were there ever times when you really clashed ideologically?
It would not really, because I'm a conservative Republican too, and the only times sometimes I would think Jack might have been a little naive in what he expected certain groups of people to do. And I would say, Jack, they're going to love you, they're going to shake your hand, and they're going to be friends with you, and they're going to go to the polls and vote against you. And he said, I don't care. And so that was, you know, that would be the only form of advice I would give. He already knew it. So there wasn't much, you know, he was so successful that there was not much. I remember when he was head of HUD, I was visiting him, and he was in his office, and the senator from New York called, and they talked about this, that, and the other, and Jack said, I've got to write him a letter and tell him such and such and such. I said, Jack, he was on the phone 5 minutes ago. Why didn't you just tell him? He said, Charlie, you don't do that that way here. I said, okay, leave me out of it. I would have told him on the phone and saved the letter. He just laughed. He said, no, it doesn't work that way. So I didn't get, you know, I was not one to give him meaningful advice. He didn't need it.
Were there times when you were with him when he was down?
You know, was with him so much. I can't even, you know, he loved his children. They were his life. And I'm trying to think of something that maybe that would have caused him to be there. Not really. Jack was just really, as I say, he was a pretty ebullient person. I don't recall him being highs and lows. He pretty much even across the board. I really don't recall any crisis that he confided in me that would really lower his spirits.
Talk a little bit, this will be a tangent in a way, but a little bit about your own career, because you got a law degree, and then what did you do?
Well, as I finished my law degree while I was playing with the Chargers, and whereas I really enjoyed the education and I enjoyed studying law, I felt like there were two things you shouldn't do if you didn't really want to do it. One, be a doctor, and the other, be a lawyer. And you'd be better off not doing it. So whereas I really enjoyed the education, I decided after I graduated, I said, I'm not going to practice law. I just don't have the calling to do it. So I got in the a man offered me the job as assistant to the president of an insurance company, and to also teach. They wanted to do some brokerage business with the agents, and I was to teach them the NASD so they could be qualified, that sort of thing. And I did that for a couple of years, and I said, I've had enough of that. So I got in the brokerage business myself, and I got with Smith Barney, and I was in the municipal bond business with them, and then with Robinson Humphrey for 10 years, and then 10 more years with Morgan Keegan. So I had basically 30 years in the municipal bond business, and it was beat farming, as my daddy used to say. I said it beat farming.
And was that in this area, or?
Yeah, I got here in 1965, and pretty much the whole time I've been in the bond business, or was in the bond business the whole time.
Did Jack Kemp ever try to encourage you to go into politics?
We talked about it. It was hard for me to describe how little interest I had in politics. I just can't abide some of the things that take place in politics. It's just, I can't do it personally. And I knew that I wasn't cut out to do that. And so we talked about it, and I think he agreed with me 100% that I shouldn't do it. And I was never interested, tempted to be in it.
Do you recall your last contacts with Jack?
Sad. We were in Oxford, Mississippi, and I think it was around New Year's of maybe 08 or 09, turning it 09. And Joanne called, talked to Sharon, and then Jack got on the phone and told me about the cancer. And it just floored me. I mean, you know, Jack was so healthy, and you know, you put him, his longevity was never something you considered, and it just floored me. I mean, it was, and then we would talk intermittent as he got worse and worse. We would talk to Joanne, talk to Jack, and it was one of the saddest 4 or 5 months I've ever had in my life. It was tough. And I can imagine how tough it was on those poor kids and Joanne, bless her heart. So yeah, I recall a lot from January to May, I sure do.
Did you go up and see him at all?
As luck would have it, I was in the hospital myself with a kidney problem when I was supposed to go up to see him. And so I couldn't go. And they had a huge, as you well know, turnout and everything, and I couldn't. I was in a hospital bed, and it was tough not being able to go because I wanted to say goodbye to him.
How do you think he should be remembered?
I think that Jack should be. I think his strongest points, whether you agree or disagree, was his belief in what he was doing and what he believed in, and he never varied. He never wavered, and you could always know where he stood. And I think he was obviously Ronald Reagan. When you say that, you're talking another stratosphere. But I think Jack was right up there in the conservative movement. When you think about who we had prior to that, Jimmy Carter and for Jack and these people to bring the conservative movement forward, and to my way of thinking, just me, put this country in its best state that it had been in maybe ever. And I think Jack had a big part to do with that, because he was one of in the forefront of the conservative fight, never backed down, but always, but not vitriolic or mean-spirited. He was always up about it. And whereas he might jokingly tease someone on the other side of the aisle, I don't think he made enemies on the other side of the aisle. I think they respected him, even if they disagreed with him. He could disagree without being disagreeable, I guess is the term.
Do you think he would have made a good president?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. Because I agree with his politics. And so you can imagine what I think about what's going on right now. But so, yeah, I think he was smart enough to surround himself with some really, really bright, strong individuals, and which I naively think helps make the presidency. I don't think one man can be that multifaceted, but yeah, I think he would do that, and I think he would listen to their advice, especially if he agreed with them. But I cannot see how he would have failed as a president, because he had a lot of the same attributes as Ronald Reagan. He had on the surface a simplicity that below the surface was not. He was pretty complex individual, and he had a way of pouring oil on the waters. He had a style about him that people gravitate toward him, even those people who he vehemently disagreed with, and vice versa. So yeah, I think he could have been a good president.
And you don't think with his energy level that he might have burned out with the responsibilities of the presidency?
No, I don't think I think burnout was not a word in his vocabulary. Let's put it this way. Certainly in the 49 years that I knew him, I never saw him remotely trending that way. He was a pretty up guy.
In '69, Pete Rozelle resigned as
Right.
commissioner. Did Jack ever express an interest in that position?
Something triggers something in my memory, but I don't recall that it was serious. I mean, it may have been, but if it was, I was not privy to it for some reason, and I really don't know what went on behind closed doors, so to speak. And but certainly he would have been a good candidate for that.
Are we leaving anything unsaid that you're gonna, when I get out in the car there, you're gonna say, why didn't I tell him that story?
Oh, stories. Now that's another.
Well, let's have a little story section here.
Well, let me think of a funny Jack Kemp story. One of the funny stories, when Jack would get at the top of the ski lift and started skiing, I said, Jack, please post your children on both sides of the ski run to warn the people that you're coming, because you're going to kill somebody. And I can see in the Denver Post, Kemp kills child, and he would die laughing. No, I'm better than that. Whoom, down he would go, 100 miles an hour. Never stopped, just kept going. And I would think, oh my goodness, is he going to make it this time? But he was such a great skier. And so one of our, and Joanne was on to him all the time about skiing so fast, but he wasn't out of control. To a Southerner, it appeared that he was out of control, but he really wasn't. And so I was always on him about that. And but when one of the funny things, I'd go over to his house in Vail, and invariably, and I don't know how he got them, but there would be the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Denver Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And he would have read what he wanted to read in all of them. And he said, and we just really wanted to discuss it. I mean, when we sit down, that was the topic of the day. He wanted to discuss something. He would be irate about something he read in the New York Times and Washington Post, and be happy about something he read in the Wall Street Journal. And so we would go down through that to have that discussion. Because his interest, it was his interest in public service. I keep saying politics. Jack, to my way of thinking, was not a politician. He was in politics, but the pejorative term politician, he was not. And so his zeal for public service would come out even on vacations when he would read all these papers and something would trigger him and he would go off and he would either be really happy or mad as he could be. And so, but that was Jack. That was Jack. Beloved. And I really, like you say, the people that ran the gamut of the people who loved Jack or liked him a great deal. It would go from guys he knew in 1960 in pro football all the way to the last day. If you knew Jack and understood his foibles and his little quirks, you had to love him because he was just wide open for everybody. And like I say, if you took the trouble and didn't prejudge, then even if you were his enemy politically, you had to like him.
Thank you very much.
You bet.